In the quiet suburbs of Sugarcreek Township, Ohio, the end of October usually meant falling leaves, chilly winds, and the calm anticipation of winter. But on the morning of October 25th, 2025, that peace was shattered. Inside a small apartment complex near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a story of love, betrayal, and violence unfolded, one that would leave the entire community reeling. Jacob Pritchard, 34, was known as a disciplined airman, a man shaped by the military's order and precision. Those who knew him describe him as polite, quiet, and deeply devoted to his wife, Jamie. She was 33, ambitious, and equally dedicated to her career. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple, respected, admired, a model of commitment and success. But behind the smiles and the carefully framed photos, something dark had been festering for months. Rumors had swirled around the base. Jacob's marriage had grown cold, the long hours and emotional distance pushing the couple further apart. Jamie had begun to confide in another colleague, someone who seemed to understand her better than her husband ever could. It was innocent at first, until it wasn't. And when Jacob found out, something inside him broke. On that cold Friday morning, neighbors heard muffled shouting, something heavy hitting the wall. But in military housing, people learn not to interfere. Minutes later, the shouting stopped. What happened next would shock even the most hardened investigators Jacob had confronted Jamie in their living room. The conversation escalated. Words turned to screams. Then, in a moment of uncontrollable rage, Jacob pulled the trigger. Jamie fell instantly. The woman he once swore to protect was now lifeless at his feet. For a long moment, Jacob stood frozen, staring at what he had done. Then came silence. Heavy. Absolute. But the horror didn't end there. Jacob, driven by a twisted sense of purpose, loaded Jamie's body into the trunk of his grey sedan. He drove for nearly an hour, down empty Ohio roads, his mind slipping further into darkness. Somewhere along the way, he made a stop at another woman's home. Police later identified her as an acquaintance from the base, though her name has not been publicly released. There, Jacob repeated the nightmare, taking another life before continuing his grim journey. A quiet town far from where the tragedy began. He parked the car neatly, left the trunk slightly open, and sat behind the wheel. Witnesses said he looked calm, eerily calm. Then, Jacob turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. Hours later, a passerby noticed the open trunk. When police arrived, they discovered the unthinkable: 2 bodies and the man responsible, all connected by a chain of betrayal, heartbreak, and irreversible decisions. The air around the scene was heavy, the silence only broken by the hum of police radios and the faint rustle of autumn leaves. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a grim picture emerged. Jacob's phone contained messages, unsent and haunting, apologies, confusion, fragments of a man torn between love and madness. One note simply read, "I couldn't live with what I've become." The news spread quickly. The Wright-Patterson community, known for its discipline and unity, was shaken. Military officials released a brief statement acknowledging the tragedy but offering few details. Meanwhile, friends of Jamie flooded social media with tributes, photos of her smiling in uniform, stories of her kindness, her leadership, her dreams. Under the lens, we see it clearly. Behind every smile, every perfect photo, there's a story we may never fully understand. And sometimes, understanding comes too late.